Teddy, very much for painting such a broad backdrop for us, for which to consider everything that you've said. And when that comes from such personal experience, of course, it's always much more poignant for us to listen to. So thank you very much for doing that for us. Teddy, in what you said, we're open for questions. I'll start with the first one if I can. But you spoke to us about racism being both in Africa and in the UK. You know, nobody has a monopoly on it. So I wonder whether you'd say something to us about, I noticed when you left Zambia first of all for South Africa. And of course, that's interesting because of apartheid in South Africa, where we talk of racism, which was very strong there. But you left just at the end as apartheid had ended. So I wonder whether you'd say something about how you found that situation when you got there at the time, and what was the atmosphere like for a black man going to work in a university in an emerging South Africa, as it were.
Yeah. Thank you, Vaughn, for that. Yes, I went to South Africa for my postgraduate studies just at the time that the country had become free. Yes, and it was a very big challenge because the country was wrestling with all the issues. You know, there was a commission that was put in place, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to try and bring reconciliation among the races and the peoples of South Africa. But I would want specifically to address the situation in the university where I found myself. Yes, I went to the University of Cape Town, which was quite an affluent and university. And I think for many years there were very few black students there. And so there was a situation where in the first year, a lot of black students would admit it, only to be failed at the end of the year. And that was sort of quite a trend that was coming. But I could say that change was taking place. I saw that most of the faculties and departments were beginning to employ African lecturers and tutors who were taking offices. And in terms of student relationships, I still saw that there were tensions between the black population. And within the black population, because of the affirmative action, the government had come up with a policy of affirmative action to try and empower those who were disadvantaged during the apartheid era. And that was a cause of a problem because most of the black people, the Asians, would get jobs, but the whites were losing jobs. So that was the disparity, that it's more like moving from one oppressor only to be replaced with another. So that was quite tragic in the sense that what was being seen as gain in one community was also being seen as loss. But also when you look at the Cape Town itself, but a very rich and wealthy city, the disparity between the haves, those who have and those who have not, between the white areas and also the black communities is shocking. If you went to places like Gugulet to Kailisha, it's more like people live in boxes. But if you went to Rondebosch, where I lived, very posh, very good housing with all the infrastructure and facilities. And so that was there, and also in the church as well, you had all these problems of between blacks and whites. So I saw it as a struggle that would continue and would take time to sort of rebuild the nation.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Teddy. Another question, during your talk, you touched on Black Lives Matter. And that has been quite an issue very recently in our country, I mean, throughout the world, but in our country. And there's a sense in which it's been a little bit controversial because there have been those who have felt let down and perhaps offended that people haven't rallied to the Black Lives Matter theme coalition quickly enough or loudly enough. And then there have been others who have been cautious about the movement because it's so broad and so that. Can you say something a little bit more about that, about your experience more recently about that in this country? Have you, you know, there's a sense in which people are saying, look, I don't have to support Black Lives Matter in order to be against racism. And then there've been those who are saying, but you're actually making an academic point when actually you just need to get behind it. Where are you with that, Teddy?
Yeah, for me, as I said, I salute the values of the initial founding of the Black Lives Matter. I understand the cause they're trying to achieve, but I think recently some of that objective has been tarnished with the way in which they have gone about in terms of protest and violence. And for me also, the value that all lives matter, I think, is critical, because the moment we begin to put ourselves in particular boxes, if we say Black Lives Matter, what about the lives of the whites and other races? So I think possibly we need a slogan that will be inclusive, that everybody is on board to fight what is racism, because I know that there is racism against blacks, but there can also be racism against whites. And so we need to be open to that reality, that it's not only an academic, I think, but when I have taken the knee myself and saluted the cause, but I want it to be broader, to be inclusive of everyone. Yes. In the Methodist Church, we had an organization which was known as Black Ministers. And I think now it's about 10 years, they have had to change the name of that organization. It's now known as Belonging Together, so that everybody has a sense of belonging. If you are not Black, and there's an organization with that label, you feel like you're being excluded. So I think that's my contention. The objectives are great, but let's open up that to include our races.
Okay, thank you, Teddy, for that. It's interesting what you say, because you raise the issue of, that Black people can be racist as well. I suppose what many people would say is that it's so overwhelmingly the other way because of history and goodness knows what that, where Black people have been treated, prejudicially for so long, that is something that we need to focus on, to concentrate on, and to do something about. But given what you said, as a Black person now living in the UK, what do you think that non-Black people should do to combat racism? And what part do you think that non-white people should play in that?
Thank you very much, Paul. I think we, as we celebrate Black, Month history, I think the most important thing is for us to be able to, claim our identity. And I think to have a sense of belonging to this nation. And I think we can achieve that through education. So there is a sense in which we need to ensure that our children and everybody is educated about their past. I think we need to know where we have come from, where we are, and where we are going. And also to know the values of society, of coexistence with other people. And then I'm not demeaning the pain that we as Black people have gone through during the eras of colonialism, slavery, and other kind of atrocities that has been committed against Black people. But we can only champion that if we ourselves become the change itself. That actually is not vengeance that we seek, but we're able to respond with love, to respond with justice, to respond with all the values that would build a community togetherness. But once we begin to segregate ourselves and put ourselves in boxes, then the other group also feels the need to empower themselves rather than defend themselves. So I think we just need that openness, education, that everybody gets involved into it.
Teddy, you've come over to the UK from Zambia, South Africa, then over to Bari, first of all, and now to the promised land in Porthcawl, of course, where we are very glad to have you. The interesting thing there is, though, Teddy, that, Porthcawl is very much the racial mix in Porthcawl is virtually non-existent. It is very much a kind of tends to be white middle class kind of community. And you have come into that community, not just as a member living around the corner, but as one of our community leaders, a significant person in the community who's seen about the place, who takes a lead on things. I know this is a difficult question, really, but how would you assess the level of racial prejudice generally in the UK today? How would you assess that?
I think we have a long way to go. Yes, I have experienced a lot of situations. For instance, sometimes if I walked into a church and sat in a pew, if the other pews that vacant, people will not come and sit where I'm seated. So I've had those experiences, but also I've had very positive experiences, and that's why I refer to this country as one of the great nations, a country where there's acceptance and welcome, and a lot of things that I've seen. But we had situations like when we were in Penarth, when it was the day when we put out the rubbish for collection outside. We had a lady who used to come and look into our rubbish, and then she'd be saying, "Oh, now they are eating this," and they're saying that. So it was quite interesting. I refer to racism being both in Africa and also here, actually in significant, because I remember before I actually understood the differences of the nations in this country, Scotland, England, and Wales. I saw a bit of that in Zambia, but I didn't have enough knowledge of it. I was teaching in a university where we had lecturers who came from Scotland, from the Church of Scotland. Some came from the Methodist Church in England. And also we had lecturers who came from Wales and also Canada and other places. And so there was a time when the church appointed one of the Scottish lecturers to be the principal of the college. And then I saw a protest amongst the Scottish and the English, lecturers saying, "Oh, then we better change the name of this college to the Church of Scotland," the university. Because I didn't know those. But coming here, I see that actually even here you have the Welsh, see themselves as different, and then you have the English and the Scottish. And I think it's those crossing of the borders and the issues of racism, nationalism, tribalism, I refer to cross all those areas. Yes, so there's been a lot of good and bad, but I think we need to concentrate more on goodness and ensure that is what we champion, that this country becomes justice for all, there's equality for all, that everybody is treated fairly in the justice system, in education, in seeking jobs, and everywhere else, that there is respect for human life. So I think that's my take on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Teddy. We tend to talk quite a bit these days about intersectionality, how one person isn't just one thing. So you are not just a man. You are an African man. You are Black. You are a religious man, and it's about the connections between all those things in you, and that if we are going to treat each other and others with dignity and respect, we need to take into account the wholeness of who that person is, not just one aspect of their life. So I wonder, have you ever experienced prejudice that is not purely a matter of race? Have you political or religious or social or tribal? Have you experienced other kinds of prejudice, perhaps?
Yes, and most of the examples actually would stem from the church itself. Yes, when you apply for a particular position, the way that you'd be treated within the institution sometimes can be different in the way that another person will be treated for the same thing, So we would have that kind of prejudice. But I want to say that the Methodist Church, which I work for, actually values issues of diversity, issues of inclusion, and issues of equality. And in fact, at our last conference, that was the major theme that even led to the election of a female Black president for the Methodist Church. And so I think there are prejudices that we encounter in life, but it's how you respond to those prejudices, I think, which are important. Because if you respond to them negatively, you actually are perpetuating a kind of reaction which might not end well. But if you are able to deal with those positively and to be able to ensure that there's the championing of love, there is the issues of, and actually to talk about the people are bringing that to you. That's what I feel, openness and dialogue, and to be able to confront it as soon as it happens.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm not sure what the state of religion is in Zambia, Teddy, but it could be described as not exactly in its heyday in the UK. And indeed, we have become increasingly what people claim, I would want to question it, but what people claim a secular society. So you've experienced living in different cultures. Could you say something about how religion has impacted on those cultures and whether its impact you feel has been good or bad?
Yeah, in Zambia, where I come from, Christianity is the dominant religion in the country. In fact, the Zambian constitution has got a preamble to it which says Zambia is a Christian nation. That preamble was made part of the constitution, not because the government in power was religious or Christian, but they wanted to use it for political gain. Because if you wanted to win an election in Zambia, the first thing that a politician would do is start going to church. The church is very powerful in Zambia, politically, socially, and in many areas of human life, and especially the Roman Catholic Church. And so the voice of the church is powerful and is heard and respected. So when the church or the religious leaders voice something or protest on something, the government will listen. And so we always joke in Zambia that if you want to fundraise in Zambia for the church, wait for elections, because the politicians become very generous, to be able to give during that time. But it's also been a sense, an abuse, and because of that link between the church and the state. So we have a lot of these smaller churches which are springing up today, most of the evangelical churches that actually are coming up and ordaining the government to be a God-given government. And so a government is able to hide behind that because they've got a church that ordains their actions and they're able to perpetuate their sort of evil deeds. I'll give you an example. When the government actually decided to declare Zambia as a Christian nation, we, the mainline churches, were opposed to that declaration. And that might look like a contradiction because the government wanted that to enter, and we said, no, it's not your duty as the state to declare this nation Christian. It's a sacred duty. So leave that to the religious sphere, yes. But the government still went with it. And the government that did that won a lot of elections because the members of the churches are very sympathetic to Christians. So there's a sense in which it can be abused. But when I moved to this country, I tend to think the church here is very weak politically. Yes, the church doesn't involve itself very much openly in social issues. It's very rare that would have bishops pastors coming up to be able to reflect on national issues which are affecting the nation. Of course, I'm aware of the church and state relationship in England, where the Church of England is part of the establishment. But I still don't see much of the prophetic voice even there.
Teddy, do you think that's a good thing? I mean, one of the things that often the church is criticised for when it actually comments on things that are not specifically religious. Do you think there's room for religion in society to be able to make those comments? And what do you make of the opposition to the idea of that?
Yes, well, religion is politics, yes. When prices of commodities go up, taxes go up, all of us complain, and we're engaging in economic issues. When political issues are not going well, everybody complains, including the church. Those are politics. For me, I don't see a dichotomy between politics and religion, because we have a prophetic voice to engage in social and political issues of justice. And so a church has quite a significant role to play in national affairs. Of course, not interfering in the governance of the nation. That is left to the politician. But we are there to offer a prophetic voice, to be able to stand, for those who are oppressed in the community, the poor. We're just talking about Black History Month. I think the church needs to give a prophetic voice, but many other times that the church is silent, in the midst of oppression and exploitation.
And in Zambia, you mentioned the politician saying Zambia was a Christian country, Teddy. How would you assess the level of democracy, freedom, and human rights in Zambia? Do you think it's much better because it styles itself as a Christian country?
No, it's very poor, Vaughan. Yes, the government uses religion to hide.
Right.
Yes, and this is where the mainline churches actually are opposed to it. Because when you have ministers and government ministers trying to be present and officiating at many of the religious occasions, people think, but when you come to the actual practice of democracy, the attitude of the government towards the church itself, in trying sometimes even to eliminate church leaders and sometimes to silence the opposition, where opposition members are locked up in prison for trumped up charges for things they have not done. Can you imagine? We had a situation a few years ago where the presidential motorcade was met on the main route with the motorcade of the opposition leader. And the security wanted the opposition leader to leave the road, just not give way for the presidential motorcade. And the group that was driving the motorcade for the opposition leader didn't want that. And so that was, and then the political opposition leader was charged with treason just for a traffic offense. And it took a long time through the courts. He was, of course, set free and declared innocent. So that's the kind of abuse of authority we have in terms of politics, where the politicians would want to abuse their authority. But when you have that marriage between the church and the state, you are blind to those injustices. And that's what the mainline churches would like to see, that separation.
Yeah. Teddy, we're very, very grateful that you've been with us today, because it's been enlightening to hear something of your story and what your experiences have been. I'm going to ask you two questions in one as the final question before I hand over to Claire. And they are this. What are the two main things about your Zambian African society that you would like to see more of in the UK society? And then as well, I want to turn that question on its head and say to you, so what are the two things about our society in the UK that you would like to see mirrored in African societies?
Yes, the first thing I think I want to talk about that I would want to see more in this country, possibly mirrored from Africa, but which I also see as one of the Victorian values. I think is the care for the elderly in our country. One of the things I had a shock of when I arrived was the care homes, and nursing homes, because we do not have that culture in Africa. The elderly live with their children, with their grandchildren especially, and nieces where they're more free. And sometimes when I visit and do services in care and nursing homes, I see the elderly paraded in these big chairs, before a television set, when they could have been spending that time with their grandchildren or nieces. And so possibly that is something which would never happen, because it's a society transformation of what the culture is. So that's one area. The other area is an issue of respect. Yes, I come from a culture where we value respect for the elderly and for one another. In fact, the more gray hair you have, the more respect that you command in community. And the older you are, you gain more respect. Yes. And I think those are some of the values I'd like to see, especially among our young people. Like if you boarded the bus where the young people are seated in chairs, and elderly person comes in and there is no chair, very few children would give a seat, offer a seat for an elderly person walking on the streets. And just the way some of the young people would respond and speak to the elderly, I think we have quite a lot to do in there. And then sitting also on the board of governors in the school, with the challenges we face, the respect among the young people towards their churches and the school authorities, I think leaves a lot to be desired. But in terms of the culture in Britain, what I would take back home in Zambia, I think one of the things probably stemming from, what I've noticed here, especially in terms of jobs, I think in Zambia, we are a very proud people. There are some jobs that are frowned upon that many people would not want to do. Yes, they wouldn't even be proud to say they do a particular job. But I think what I notice in this country is respect for all types of jobs. Yes. For instance, to work as a funeral undertaker is not something that actually you can even announce to your friends in Zambia. You would be working in hiding, because if everybody knew that you were a funeral undertaker, you'd be shunned even in the community. So I think that's kind of, I think there's something that we can take lessons and learn from here. And also in my culture, especially if you do my job of a minister, people think you don't even need to rest. You don't need a Saturday. You don't need space, and you have most of the houses for ministers actually built just, behind the church. And so the manse where the minister lives is visited by members of the church almost 24 hours, causing disruption and havoc to the children and also to the family. But since coming to this country, I think there is a lot of respect for someone's private space. Members encourage me to take a time off, that's sort of giving space for your family time. I think that those are some of the values I'll take from this country. They're quite powerful.
Okay, Teddy, thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure listening to you and then having this conversation with you. I'm going to hand over to Claire now, who's going to take over. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vaughan, and thank you for inviting me to say a few words. It's a real privilege to be here with both of you today. Thank you also, Vaughan, for such kind words about the start of the event. It's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure to work in partnership with you in the chaplaincy over the many years that we've worked together. Firstly, I wanted to thank Vaughan for arranging this great event that we've all been at today. This is the second in a series of Black History Month events taking place across USW this year. Each one of those is raising our awareness. It's giving us a chance to hear different experiences and perspectives and sharing with us different aspects of Black history. Secondly, I wanted to say a real heartfelt thank you so much to Revd Professor Teddy for joining us all at USW today and sharing with us your breadth of experiences in Zambia, in South Africa and in South Wales, and the work that you've been involved in various churches, universities and with South Wales Police, and for sharing with us your perspectives on religion, politics, human rights, difference in cultures, and providing us with insights into Black history. Thank you for sharing with us the reasons why we need to celebrate Black History Month and the two distinct reasons for why 2020 has made this a different and unique year in terms of the disproportionate impact of coronavirus on Black communities, which, as you said, has shone a light on the persistent and systemic racial inequality in our society, and also the upsurge of the Black Lives Matter movement, with voices challenging the status quo and really longing for justice locally and globally. The insight that Revd Professor Teddy has shared with us today, including personal accounts of racial discrimination and prejudice in Africa and in Wales, I know will have been of great interest and will have touched many of us today. Teddy has highlighted that we have a long way to go to eradicate racial discrimination. It's also been really valuable to hear about Teddy's views around Black Lives Matter. This has been a really important discussion today and has extended a discussion that we've been having at the university over the summer and beyond, highlighting the need for us, both as individuals and collectively as an organisation, to look at ourselves, our practices, how colleagues and students experience the university and the disparity in those experiences and outcomes. Teddy has highlighted that we really need to continue this vital dialogue, and we all need to ensure that we all take action to address racial discrimination and prejudice. Teddy has also highlighted that it's each and every one of our responsibilities to challenge inequity and racial discrimination and to contribute to creating a more equal society. Like me, I'm sure Teddy has said many things today that has really stood out as key messages, notably that we cannot afford to remain silent, and to create change, we need to have conversations about how we live in harmony with one another, and telling us the importance of listening and hearing about what is wrong within our communities. Teddy's reminder that we must not remain neutral in the face of injustice. To do so is to be on the side of the oppressor, and that everyone must be on board and get involved to fight racism and promote fairness and justice has been really strong to me today. Thank you, Teddy, for sharing your experiences and your perspectives with us today, for answering all of our questions and being so open and honest. I was listening avidly and I was riveted throughout the discussion, and I know the audience will have been too. So before we close the event today, following on from Vaughan's introduction at the start, just a little reminder about the other events taking place throughout October for Black History Month. The Student Union have 3 events which I know they would love to see you all at. As Vaughan said, at 4 o'clock today, there is Cook with Kay. So that's a live cooking demonstration, which will also involve a discussion around Black history. On Thursday, the 22nd of October, Lewis Gray, USW Senior Lecturer in Music Business, will be sharing his perspective on being Black in creative industries in the UK and celebrating the success of Black creatives. And then to close Black History Month on the 28th of October, the USW Student Union Book Club will be hosting a discussion on the book Why I Am No Longer Talking to White People About Race. I know the Student Union would welcome all of you to those events, and there's further information on Facebook, Twitter and the Student Union's website. So finally, just to close then, thank you all so much for joining us today for what I think has been a really, really important discussion. And thank you again, Revd Professor Teddy, for providing us with such a fascinating, worthwhile and insightful hour. I am sure we've all learned so much, and we'll continue to reflect upon what you have shared with us throughout the rest of today, this week and beyond. Thank you.